So in this video, we'll be taking a look at how we deal with questions on reading comprehensions. So whenever you're given a passage or a text, you might have come across questions that ask you to find out some information that's included or given in the text. For instance, if you have, let's say, a poem about a statue, and it's given in the passage that the statue was a very big statue, it was a very magnificent statue, and that it was made of gold. So one of the questions that you could be asked could be something like, what was a statue made of? So for these questions, you need to look back at the passage and then see if you have the information that you require. Now, obviously, there has to be some technique, some strategy we can use to figure out how to answer these questions. It's simple. The rules are clear and straightforward. Just make sure you remember them. Number one, read the whole text, please. And this is really important because a lot of times students think that you can simply look at a question and without reading the entire text or the entire passage, you can still figure out the answers. Because it seems easy, right? That if the question is asking you for information that's already in the text, then it should have common words. This is a very big mistake. This is called cherry picking. Don't do that. Just because a question has a certain word, let's say, imagine that the question is, who was, let's say, Babur? Right? Imagine this is the question and the passage is about something like Babur was an old man who lived somewhere in the mountains or whatever. So here, just because I have the word Babur doesn't mean that every single sentence that has the word Babur is going to be my answer. Now, it could confuse you. Just because the first sentence that you read has Babur in it and the question has Babur, I assume that this is the answer to my question. That's wrong. You need to read the entire passage before you attempt to answer the questions. Now, this is one particular strategy you could adopt to answer these kinds of questions that ask you for information that's given in the passage. There's another technique we'll be looking at a little later. But just remember, don't get into the habit of just looking at a particular word in the question and thinking, oh, this is where the word is, so that ought to be the answer. No. It's best to first read through at least the entire paragraph where you think the answer might be. The best way to do it would be to read the entire passage and to read it actively. This is really important. When I say that you need to read actively, what I mean is you're not just reading for your entertainment, right? When you're sitting in your classroom and you're studying something, you're studying the text in front of you. You're studying with an eye for certain things that you need to look out for. What are these certain things that you need to keep in your mind when you read? Number one, you need to take notes. What this means is that as you read, mentally you have to figure out what kinds of things the author is trying to tell you. You have to try to understand what the important points are and maybe perhaps take a pencil or a highlighter and just mark them out. If you think as you read that this line is really important, then you need to mark it out. Now this is important because it might help you later when you're trying to answer the questions that ask you for important information in the text, right? So how do you know which points are important? Number one, they could be points or sentences that seem to summarize the entire paragraph or seem to summarize some particular lines. So these sentences that we have are called topic sentences. They basically summarize the entire paragraph, right? So every paragraph has one topic sentence. Usually it comes at the beginning of the paragraph, but it could come in the middle or even at the end. But look out for those topic sentences because they can actually help you figure out what the entire paragraph is about, and those would usually give you some important information. And similarly, you could have certain examples in your text, so those examples might be important as well. Then what do you do next? You need to read and then figure out what the main idea of the passage is. Why is this important? It's because only when you understand what the entire passage is trying to say, what it's trying to convey, what is the purpose of the author writing that passage, only when you understand what the entire passage is about as a whole, will you be able to get into the mind of the author and answer the questions accordingly. So it's important that you try to think from the point of view of the author how the person was feeling, what the point of view of the author was, and what the person wanted to convey through the text. This is really important. Next, what is the author's tone? What was the author's attitude when they were writing the particular text or the particular passage? What the tone means is what kind of stance did they hold, or what was the manner in which they were writing the text. Was it happy? Was it excited? Was it sad? Was it angry? Was it argumentative? There are many different tones we could have when we write. For instance, I could say the same sentence and it could mean two very different things based on the tone that I use. If I ask you, what are you doing? In a normal way. So the tone is normal, right? But if I ask you the same question, what do you think you're doing? So that means that I'm expressing the same thing but in an angry tone. So you need to look out for the author's tone to try to get into the head of the author and answer the questions that follow. Now watch out for linking words. Linking words are basically those phrases and words that help you understand the connection or relationship between sentences or even between paragraphs. So these linking words are really important because they help signify where important points of the passage are. And if questions ask you about something related to a particular point in the passage, those linking words are sure to help you understand where that particular link was made and how and when it happened. So whenever you find a linking word, you note it down and make sure that you understand the link between the sentences so that it helps you out later. So all of these things that we saw right now, taking down the notes, thinking of the main idea, thinking about what the author's tone was, all of these points have to be done before you start attempting the questions. And you must read the entire passage. Please don't make the mistake of thinking just by reading the first paragraph and the last paragraph, that's it, and I can go on to the questions. Do not make that mistake. The only way that you can score well in a reading comprehension exam or a test is by reading the entire passage, is by getting into the shoes of the author as you read. Now, there are two approaches that you can have once you start with the questions. So you have the passage question approach or the question passage approach. So in the first approach, you read the passage actively, like we already discussed, taking down the notes, mentally recording everything that you're going through, marking out any new words that you come across that you can't understand so that you can maybe come back to it later and try to figure out what the meaning of the word is through the context. So you read the passage first, actively, take down the notes, and then you attempt the questions. So if you're a fast reader or relatively fast reader, then this would be the kind of approach that would best suit you. But everybody has their own styles. So there's another approach that's available for people who are slightly slower readers, and that's the question passage approach. In the question passage approach, the first thing you do is go through the questions and go through their multiple choice answers if there are multiple choice answers. So by looking at the questions first, you mentally prepare yourself for what you need to look out for when you read the passage. So you read the questions first, you skim through them, and then you quickly go back to the passage and you read through the passage to figure out where the answers to those questions lie. So try both methods, this is what I would suggest, and whichever one works for you or is better for you and you think you can deal with the passages or understand how to answer them better using whichever approach suits you best, that should be the strategy that you should adopt. Now always remember that when you're trying to answer questions that ask you to just pick up information from the text, then it usually means that either they're looking for answers that are included in the text, or that you should not perhaps add your own opinions unless it's stated that you need to give your own opinions. But usually when you deal with a reading comprehension passage, do not try to add your own opinions into the answers, because that's not what examiners usually look for. They're looking for evidence that's there right in the text. So if I ask you who was Babur, I'm not going to be talking about the King Babur from ancient times, and I won't answer, I think it was a king as well. That was his name at that time. Instead, they're asking me this question based on the passage that they had given me. So I need to base my answer on that. So these are the ways in which you have to answer reading comprehension, gathering information questions that ask you to pick up information directly from the text. This is perhaps one of the easiest type of questions that you have to answer. because they are not asking you to think too much on your own. You don't have to make any opinions, you don't have to make any implications or inferences. All you have to do is search for the answer that's already hidden there somewhere in the text.